Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to Authors Talk Live. My name is Hattie Knight, and I am the author of Against Company Policy and one of your weekly co hosts here at Authors Talk, Caroline Clark Graves, who is the found out that she was the adopted daughter or granddaughter of the Nat King Cole. So that's going to be a story in and of itself. She is a journalist, she's an author, she is daughter-in-law of Earl Graves' Black Enterprise Mag. A caller right now on Authors Talk Live who's just joined us.
Hi, Hattie. This is Caroline Clark. How are you?
I'm well, and you? How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great.
Okay, so I'm so glad that you are on the air with us. You are an award-winning journalist, and we've known each other for quite a few years.
Just a few.
Just a few. It's amazing how far Bronx High School of Science graduates have gone.
It really is.
And some of the various careers that we have. So class of 81 is, oops, I said it, represented, sorry.
That's okay.
So I am so honored to have you here on the station and, have you on the radio with us at Authors Talk Live to talk about your new offering, as well as to give us some background about yourself. Let our listeners know who Caroline Clark Graves is and some of the things that you've done, as well as your latest offering.
Well, first, thanks for having me, Hattie. I really appreciate it. And congratulations to you on your book and the show and everything else that you're doing. I have been a journalist for a long time, and I work at Black Enterprise, where I do a number of things. I host one of our TV shows. I run a women's conference, the annual Women of Power Summit, and our women's brand there. So that's my day job, basically. And I have written a business book. I wrote a business book years ago for Black Enterprise called Take a Lesson. My latest book is very different. It's a huge departure for me. It's called Postcards from Cookie, and it's really a very personal story, which is odd because, I'm used to being like you. I ask people the questions. I interview other people and talk about their stories and write about their stories. But I decided to write a memoir, my own story, because I had a series of pretty extraordinary things happen to me. And it felt really like such a gift that it felt too big to keep. And a friend of mine who was a book editor said, God made this your story and God made you a writer, so obviously you're supposed to write it. And given the feedback since writing Postcards from Cookie, I think that's proven to be true.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, when I heard the story was coming out, I saw somebody forwarded me the article in the I think it was the Daily News. It was either the News or the Times. I'm sorry, I don't recall which one, but they sent it to me saying that the story had come out and that your book was shortly to follow. Tell our listeners about it, if you don't mind sharing. Well, you put it in writing, so I guess you don't mind, but I know it's very personal for you. A very personal story that is just amazing in and of itself.
Yeah, I long story short, I was adopted as an infant, and I found out when I was a child. I was almost 8 when my parents told me, and it's adoption doesn't happen that way anymore. These days when children are adopted, they always know. So there's not this moment of before you knew you were adopted and then after, which was pretty standard for my generation. But I felt very blessed to be adopted really from the beginning. I have a wonderful family, really, and just an amazing family. I've always been very, very fortunate. And I really felt from the beginning like I was where I belonged, and the only way for me to get there was through another woman because my mother wasn't able to conceive. So I wasn't longing to find out what I'd lost or where, what I'd been born into. But I started in my mid-20s to have joint pains that just weren't consistent with being that young, and I hadn't been, you and I went to Bronx High School of Science, so we hadn't been these big student athletes or anything that would explain, why I was having these issues. And when you're adopted, a very common frustration is that you do reach a certain age where you have different health issues. And whenever we go to the doctor, the first question we're always asked is, well, what's your medical history? And when you're adopted, you just don't know.
Right.
So I had had my own children by this time, and I was really frustrated in trying to figure out what was happening with me and then potentially what I could be passing on to my children. So I went back to my adoption agency in New York City to try to get medical information, which is the one thing that now by law in New York and most of the country they're required to give you, even though they can't tell you if you're born in my era anything about your biological family. They have to give you whatever medical information is available. And I was surprised to find that I was given a lot more than medical information. I was given a social history, which is sort of a picture was painted of my biological family at the time of my birth. So everything from a physical description of my birth mother to what she majored in college and what her family looked like at that time. So the number of siblings she had and just sort of general things. But her family was unique because she was adopted. She had been an orphan, and her aunt and uncle adopted her. And then she had a sister who was the biological child of her parents. She had a brother who was adopted. And then there were twins in the family who were much younger than my birth mother, 18 years younger. And there was this picture painted of extraordinary wealth, not just, they were doing well.
Right.
But they were really wealthy. And that really caught me off guard because, typically when you're adopted, I think you assume whatever you came into, whatever that situation was, it was a situation where they couldn't keep you. And so in all likelihood, financially they weren't able to keep you, among other things. Well, that was clearly not the case when I heard this story. So I left the adoption agency, I got in my car, and I started to drive home. But I'm a journalist, right? So I don't like question marks. And it was just bugging me. It was bugging me that this family sounded so unlike whatever I always thought it was. And I kept thinking, if these were African American people in the 60s who were that wealthy with maids and chauffeurs and that kind of thing, how hard could it be to find out who they are?
Right.
There couldn't have been that many. So I just started sort of cycling through things in my head, and it really sounds corny, but it did. It just hit me like a thunderbolt. I recognized the family. I knew the family. And I was right. It turns out that my birth mother was the older sister of a friend of mine since college. Actually, when I was a senior in high school looking at colleges, I had met a woman named Timbaland Cole, and we became friends. She went to Amherst, I went to Smith, and we had stayed friends all those years. It had been 20 years. She happened to be a daughter of Nat King Cole, and this was her family, and I was born to her oldest sister. So she was 18 years younger than my birth mother, but they were sisters, and I discovered that my girlfriend was in fact my aunt.
Wow.
And her sister was my mother, and my grandfather was Nat King Cole. So, it was just an extraordinary thing. And the book discusses how all that happened and then what came after, because that's really just the beginning of the journey that included my parents and her family, and and it's a journey that's still unraveling and unfolding, but it really was just an extraordinary thing.
Oh, wow. I mean, and it sounds like an extraordinary thing. I mean, to have this person that you had been friends with for all those years, and to find out that she was actually a family member.
Yeah.
That, wow. Yeah, all I can, when I started reading the book, I was just like, wow. There were parts in there where all I kept, as a journalist, like you said, as a person, as a interviewer, and a naturally curious person.
Right.
It had to be tough to to not have answers, and then to be given this information, I don't see how you would have been able to walk away without doing some research, because just naturally being curious and then to be a journalist, you would have had to have the answers. So
You're absolutely right. And people have said that, how it took so much courage for you to call her your birth mother. It took so much courage for you to pursue this. And I never think of it that way. I think, how could I not? When you're handed information that clearly leads you to some place you never expected to be, and you didn't do anything to engineer it, how do you not follow it through to the end of the line? It's a gift, and I feel like when life hands us these things, we have a responsibility really to just carry it through, because it's like the universe telling you you're meant to do this. You're meant to find whatever's there. And I say all the time, I think that the book has really resonated. As an author, when you write a book, you're so focused on just writing the book and writing the book you hope to write and telling the story you hope to tell in a way that you really want to, and hitting those deadlines. And I really didn't think about what would come after.
right.
I felt like I needed to write this story. I was led to write it, and I did. But I hadn't thought about the aftermath. And it was frightening at first, because I had really put myself out there personally, which is something that I had never done before, and I really had no intention of doing. But it's really true what they say, that when you put yourself out there in an authentic way and from a place of good intention, you'll be amazed at what happens. And what's happened in this case is that it seems to resonate with people in extraordinary ways, that have conversations starting in families that people have needed to have for a long time. You don't have to be adopted to have secrets and questions in your history
Right.
that sort of nag at you, and tease the edges of your life in ways that you may be aware of and may not be aware of. And I think when people read this book, it really it's not so much just about my story, which, I do hope uplifts people, but I think what it does is sort of tease out their own stories and their own nagging questions, and issues that have to do with people maybe they've lost or lost track of, or mysteries in their family, those things that everybody knows are there lurking beneath the surface but nobody talks about, that still impact the whole family's life. And I've just had extraordinary stories come back to me from people who this has sort of unlocked doors and windows for them,
Right.
and they've started to find their own answers. And what I always say is, you may not get the greatest answer in the world. It's often difficult. Adoption reunions are much more commonly difficult than mine. My birth mother was really, really happy that I came back to her, and it was a very healing thing for her. Giving me up had been a really traumatic experience, and her father, Nat King Cole, died weeks after I was born. So
Oh, wow.
that whole time for her had really seared her and changed the course of her life. But so the answers you find may not be great, but they're going to be yours either way, and they're going to help heal you or someone else you love. In my case, I think my birth mother needed to be found every bit as much, if not more, than I needed to find her. And I didn't think I needed to find her.
Right.
But once I did, I realized that I did. Sometimes you don't even know what you need until you get it. So I've been so grateful that the book has resonated with people, and also that it's inspired them to find their own answers.
Now, And I know that your children knew your story. They knew that you were adopted. But
Right.
how did this new, I mean, how do you introduce this new information to them or and to your family? How was that process for you? They've always
You
been
know, my
supportive, so I just, I don't expect it to be anything different, but
yeah, my children were pretty young at the time. So for them, kids are resilient
right,
and they're open really to whatever you hand them. And they were still young enough that for them it was just exciting. They were excited to have another grandma. She was like their bonus grandma. They
right,
were
right,
excited to have family in California. They were excited to just have a whole new range of people to
right.
feel connected to and be loved by. So for them it was nothing but joy and light. The hardest thing for me was to tell my parents. And if my parents had reacted with any fear or hesitation or resistance, I think I would have backed way up, because the last thing I ever wanted to do in life was hurt my parents. When we were in high school, the only reason I got good grades, quite frankly, was because the last thing I wanted to do was disappoint my parents. I was
Right.
not this great motivated student. I was motivated to be a good daughter and make my parents happy because they just loved me so well and so unconditionally, and I wanted to make them proud. So if they had been upset by this, I don't know what I would have done. I really don't. Um, Luckily, I never had to consider that question because my parents were, in the moment I told them, the way they were my entire life, which was just completely 1000% unconditionally supportive and loving and happy for me. And I think, on a basic level, given that they had very limited information about my history, on some level, they had to be genuinely thrilled just to be able to fill in their own questions about me, and what my background looked like. And in this case, to find out that I was Nat King Cole's granddaughter, my parents were right in the peak of that generation that grew up with Nat King Cole, adored Nat King Cole. My father was a huge music fan, and Nat King Cole's music filled our house my whole life. So,
Right.
I mean, I knew all the lyrics to all the songs because my dad constantly played him and a lot of others, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald. I
Right.
mean, my dad really loved music, so I had always grown up with that. But Nat King Cole was a particular favorite of theirs. And so, to find out that not only do you now have all this information on your daughter, but she just happens to be related by birth to this family was extraordinary. But the flip side of that is that it had to be really difficult, because your child now has this whole other connection potentially to another family that's not yours.
Right.
And what exactly do you do with that? And I think it was just maybe the greatest act of love for my parents to release me to that process without any encumbrances at all. They
Mm.
just said, go, reach out to her. My mother actually really directly encouraged me. She was the one. She said, just call her. Call Timlin, get her number, call her.
Right.
And I was hesitant because, it's like, how do you make that call? How do you call someone out of the blue 37 years after they've given birth to you and say, guess what?
Right.
Here I am.
Right.
It is a difficult thing to do, and you don't know what the reaction is going to be. And if my mother who raised me had to have instinctively felt, and she did instinctively feel, that my birth mother would be happy to hear from me. She had always told me that she knew my birth mother loved me very much
Mm.
because she refused to sign the papers relinquishing me until she'd been assured that I was going to a great family. And growing up hearing this, I really thought, well, this is what you're supposed to tell your adopted
Right,
child, right?
right,
Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But it sounds good. And that's
right.
what you have to tell a
Yeah,
child who's
yeah,
been given away. That, oh, you were given away, but it was because they loved you so much they wanted you to have a good life. So, I don't know, maybe it's the New Yorker in me. Even as a kid, I was kind of cynical about that. I didn't fully believe it. But she did, because when this all came about, she really urged me to make contact. And she wouldn't have done that if she'd been afraid that I would be rejected.
right.
So, my parents, I can't say enough about them. They were just extraordinary. And I, as a mother myself, I think I understand even better now
Mm.
how hard that must have been and how frightening to think, maybe everything would change for us, or maybe I would be so enamored of this other family that it would somehow, shift how I felt about them. But they never showed their cards. If they were fearful, they never let me know.
Right. And as a parent, I can't even begin. I know, when you're dealing with and dealing with family secrets especially, you just never know what the person's going to do once they have that information. And
Right.
it's tough. It's a tough place, and there are a lot of secrets that have gone to the grave with a lot of people.
There
So
there are. And we create secrets, let's face it, usually with the best of intentions.
right, right,
They're usually there to protect somebody, the child or the parent or the aunt or the uncle,
right.
whatever it is. It's a protective measure. I think it's usually secrets don't grow out of any ill intent.
No,
But oftentimes they end up having an ill effect, you know, unintentionally. And they almost never stay secrets. They usually come out, and then the revelation is harder to take because people feel like they were lied to,
right.
or people feel like they deserve to know or they had the right to know. And again, this doesn't just happen around adoption. This is a family
Yeah,
reality.
that's it.
Every family has secrets. Every family has legends and myths. Every family tells lies, often out of the goodness of someone's heart, but they can explode years later and really take a lot of things down in their wake. So, and I have to say, even in writing this book, it was really difficult because I wrestle with that too. I know we live in a reality show, TMI, too much
Right,
information
right,
culture, and I'm not a fan, honestly. Even as a journalist, I'm not a fan. I also think, you know, you don't have to put all your stuff in the street. And I had an interview with a station in Nashville, and there was a grandmother who had said, well, this baby deserved to know who her family was, but then some things do need to go to the grave with you. So maybe I needed to know, but maybe I didn't need to tell everybody else,
right, right, right.
And I understand that. I do. I understand where that comes from, and I understand what that's about, and I agree with a lot of it. But this was a story that I really felt compelled to share, mainly because I felt it would uplift people. And we're living in a time when we are all dealing with so much difficult information every day, whether it's, world politics or climate change or health care or just our own stuff, the stuff that life hands you that's just hard to manage and hard to take. And I felt like my story reaffirms a notion that I think we all want to believe, which
Right.
is that if you trust life and you do the best you can, it's going to be okay. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but it's going to be okay. It's going to turn out okay. You're going
Right.
to be all right, you
Now,
know.
and because I know because I'm thinking back to high school, I got to go back a couple years, but Because at least five,
At least,
at
at
least
least.
five. But I think about you, and I recall you were a private person. I mean, honestly, I
Yeah.
didn't know you were adopted until the book came out. So,
Right.
and it wasn't something that was well known. It wasn't something that you talked about often. So to hear this, that you had drafted this book, I know was a personal struggle for you. It wasn't something that somebody offered you $15 and you decided to put out there. So for those that think that about you, I can tell you, I've known you for a long time, and I was surprised to find that you had done the book because I know how private a person you are. And you're
Yeah.
not the kind of person that would just, sell your soul for a story. So I knew that it had to have been something very personal to you. It had to have been a very positive release for you and your family, as well as the family of the Coles. Um, and out of this, so how have you changed, Caroline, from this? How has this affected you, this process?
Oh, we don't have enough
I
time.
know.
We don't have enough time to tell you all the ways that I think I've changed as a result. First of just having this happen, and meeting and knowing Cookie, but also writing the book. Even you're right. I was private in high school. I was private as a kid. I'm still that person, and so it was difficult, and I've had people, friends who I've known through these years when all this was happening, who have read the book and said, "You've got to be kidding me. How could all this have been happening when we were working alongside each
Right,
other,
right.
or hanging out alongside of each other, and you never said anything?" But it was very personal, and it's complicated. It's
Yeah.
not the kind of thing that comes up in conversation, and it was all still evolving. So, when I'm trying to work it out, I don't really know what to say about it. So it was a journey, and it was a process. I think I had gone through a period, and Cookie, when I discovered her, Cookie had a lot of anxieties. She really changed. She really was changed by, as I said earlier, by the trauma of being forced to give me up, which many women of her generation were forced to give up children, again with the best of intentions of someone, because it was such a shameful thing at that time to be an unwed mother.
Right.
But it had a really traumatic effect on these women. And Cookie was no exception. And then, as I said, because her father died so shortly after I was born, the combination of those things just really shifted her whole life. And when we met, it was clear that she had gone through a time where she was ruled by a lot of anxieties. And she wasn't a hermit, but her life had become very small and sort of hyper controlled. She was afraid to fly. She had stopped driving even though she owned a car. She had stopped swimming even though she had a pool. She really had just become sort of a fearful person. And I went through a period, interestingly, it started before 9/11, which we're about to have the anniversary, but it was exacerbated by 9/11. A lot of anxiety, similar things, flying, and just fearfulness. And meeting her and seeing what had happened to her really made me kind of take hold of myself, because I saw what I could become if I didn't sort of wrestle that down.
Mm.
And she and I sort of started working on that together, and really grabbing onto this whole concept that fear is the opposite of faith.
Right.
And if you're a faithful person, you got to let the fear go.
Yeah.
They just can't coexist. And we both came a long way with that. I've been more. I've done better with it. I think partly because my life just demands it. I'm younger, and I have children. I have to travel for work. I just have a lot going on, and so you sort of are forced to face it and deal with it and do it. But so that's been one positive shift for both of us. I think for me more than anything, what this whole thing has taught me, and it sounds so basic, but it really is about the power of love. And Cookie was so thrilled to hear from me. She opened her arms and her life to me so completely. The entire Cole family just completely embraced me and my family, my children, my parents, my husband. They were so happy. They were so happy that Cookie got to come full circle with this. They were so happy that Timbaland and I were actually friends. It was just everybody stepped up the way you would hope they would. And they didn't have to. Nobody had to. My parents didn't have to. Cookie's other children didn't have to. She has two sons. I was raised an only child. Now I have these two brothers.
Right.
I really felt for them, I have to say, because I could only imagine, they had been raised knowing about me, which is not
okay.
common.
Right.
That's not common with adopted. When mothers give up kids and have to go on without them, from my era, they would typically not talk about it. So maybe they went on and got married and had children, but they had never said anything. Cookie hadn't done that. She had raised her sons knowing that she had had a baby girl on Christmas Day that she'd had to give up. So Christmas Day was always, they kind of knew to sort of tiptoe around her.
Right.
I really felt badly for them. I thought to grow up as a kid and know that Christmas Day is a tough day for your mother, that's a hard thing. So they could have resented me. They could have not been so excited that I came back. They were so happy for her and for me, and so supportive. So the power of really loving the people in your life enough to really truly want what is best for them, even if it's going to be a struggle for you. My family did that. Her family did that, and our families came together in a way that was just extraordinary. And it's not that we all became one big happy family and we all have cookouts and family reunions, because that's not the case.
Right.
There are 3,000 miles between the families, and I think that's a good thing because it helps make it manageable. But they came together when it mattered. They came together. They came together for me and her, and they released the two of us to be with each other. And that is a gift that there's no price, there's no match, there's no measure of that. It's just it's a boundless, bottomless, fantastic blessing.
Oh, I'm sure. This is the thing that, movies, those 4:30 movies that used to come on, the movie of the week. This is, and honestly, this is one of those stories that it just makes your heart swell, because you're thinking, this is the one where we cheer for the end, and for you to have captured that in such a powerful way, in Postcards from Cookie, as just a testament not only of the story itself, but of you as a writer and your growth as an individual, and you trusting the whole process. Because this could have been different. This could have been a different story. But considering the character of all the players, I think it attests to God's input into everybody's life, and just the way that the whole circumstances were played out makes it a very special story indeed.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And Miss Caroline, how can our listeners get a hold of your book? How can they catch up with you? Give us some contact information.
Oh, there's so many ways. The book is, available. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, HarperCollins.com. It's very readily available. Small bookstores. And I'm very readily available too. Black Enterprise. I host the Black Enterprise Business Report, which is syndicated on TV One. It's on Sundays in most markets in the morning, and I can be reached. I have a website, carolinevclark.com, or you can check me out at blackenterprise.com. And I'm on Twitter, Caroline V. Clark.
All right.
So I love to hear from readers, and I do every day. So I really welcome that, and I always try to respond because I know how busy everybody is, and I'm a big reader. I love people who still read. I don't care how you read it, Kindle,
That's it.
your iPad, whatever. I'm still a paper and ink girl, but I welcome all types of it, and I welcome your feedback and your questions and your own stories. I really do love hearing them.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on Authors Talk Live, and I look forward to wonderful things from you, and we'll continue to keep up with you. Facebook is a beautiful thing. I can, cyber stalk everybody, so and
It's
they can do
true.
the
It's
same for
true.
me. And it's like, oh my gosh, you went there, you did this. Oh, that's so wonderful, without ever having
And
to
I
pick up the
do.
phone.
And I do, Hattie. I cyberstalk you just so we're clear, just so you know. Now it's all out in the open. I'm
Oh,
just,
I feel so
I'm outing
special.
myself.
I feel so
But I'm so
special.
happy to see all the great things that are happening for you. Really, it's just thrilling. And our class, it's all good.
It
So
is all good.
congratulations to you again, and thank you so much for this opportunity. I really, really appreciate it.
And we appreciate you joining us here on Authors Talk Live. Have a beautiful Sunday afternoon.
You too, and to all your listeners. Bye bye.
And goodbye. Thank